Hi there. Just before we get into this video, let me say I've insulated this wall. Do it yourself. I'm not a tradesman. If you're in the trade, you'll see things that could have been done better. But I'm only sharing, I'm not teaching. I hope you find it useful. Welcome to Haxby Shed. This time I'm doing a DIY project to insulate this solid wall. It's particularly difficult in my house, you'll see. But if you want to insulate a solid wall, it's actually quite easy. Plasterboard with insulation bonded to the back, put it up against your existing plaster, put the screws through, a little bit of other stuff to do, but essentially it's fairly straightforward. If you get taper edge board, you can simply put the edges together, put a skim up between the boards. You don't need to replaster this surface, you can just paint it. Now if you want to be scared, continue watching this and see all the trouble I had doing this wall in our bedroom. I'm going to tell you about insulating this wall. Now this is our bedroom in a house that's maybe 200 years old, and this wall is solid. It gets very, very cold, and it's not helped by the fact that across here, about 3 feet away, is our neighbour's house. There is a gap between the two houses, but we get the wind down here, we never get any sun. Now I've thought about insulating this quite a few times. There's never been quite enough pressure, if you like, to do it, enough incentive to do it. But since the energy prices have gone so high, and I was looking at the curtains in here, and I hate the curtains in here, and I said to my wife, can't we just get rid of those curtains? And she said, well, if you're going to change those, you need to decorate. And I said, okay, good. It gives me a reason to do this wall. Now, in a number of the rooms in the house, I've already done this treatment of insulating the walls. And the way I'm going to do this one is I'm going to put on 1 inch of this Celotex Kingspan. And the reason I'm only using 1 inch is because that's all the room I've got for this. I'll tell you about it. You know, in an ideal world, you might put the insulation on the outside, but that's completely impractical in this situation. And then I'll cover this with some plasterboard. Now you can buy plasterboard with this stuff bonded onto the back, but it's about twice the price. I've only got limited space, so to be able to get this in, I'm going to have to chop some of this plaster off. When I say I've got limited space, we've got these wardrobes here, and as they move along the side of the bedroom, they go right up to the doorway. I could take off some of the architrave, trim it, move the wardrobes along, but again, then I'd struggle getting the door open. So that's what we're going to do. Now, to help us is the fact that a lot of this plaster is loose, and I think there'll be a big sheet coming off here. Now this bedroom used to be a bathroom at some stage, and before that, a long time before that, it might have even been a storeroom of some kind. So I don't know what we're going to find when we take this plaster off. I may be able to just take it off in this area where space is tight, because there's a cupboard goes here, and maybe just blend it further up there. But there is still a kind of problem, and that is that this wall tapers right out this way. But strangely, it doesn't on the outside, even though it's a single brick wall. Well, sorry, a single double brick wall is what I mean. 2 bricks thick, but no cavity. So it's very confusing, and I think the plaster's basically tapering is what's happening. It's tapering out from top to bottom by 1 3/4 inches. Well, it looks like this is just infill. Goodness me, look at that, it's virtually sand, that. How is plaster supposed to hold to that? Welcome to old houses. I think there's actually wallpaper on this stuff here. Oops, forgot to turn on the microphone. Now, not all my house is like this, believe me. I have known this corner is a bit, you know, dodgy for a while. And on the other side of the room, we had I kind of lined where the plaster was coming off, bulging off like that. When I chopped that off, many years ago now, I found that there had been a window there, and they left the wooden beam in the wall, but they not bonded the plaster to the beam, you know, with netting or something. Anyway, that was all fixed. You could frighten yourself, but it's all right. So I'll need to do some repairs up here, but even that is not as bad as it looks. Well, now we've chopped this plaster off, on average, this wall is vertical. Depends where you put your level, but trust me, it's now good enough vertical. So the whole reason for this plaster sloping out towards the bottom is the ledge. So this ledge here, yeah? So what I'm going to do is, compromise is the order of the day. That's where my insulation will go. That's where my plasterboard will go. There we go. Okay. Now I've cut a board which is the right length. This cupboard is 800, and that cupboard will go in between with a pretty decent space there. Now I think that's going to give me enough for the skirting board, which will mean that the drawers will open without touching the skirting board. Absolute worst case, I'll just cut a bit off the skirting board. Is it worth it? You're probably thinking, really, is this worth it? And I'll just explain why it is worth it. So this wall has a U value of 2 watts per metre squared per degree difference, and this has a U value of 1. So the lower the value, the more insulation you get. Well, having just looked it up online to check, basically to get the combined U value you add the R values, and the R value is the reciprocal of the U value. So if that's a U of 2, that's an R of half. If this is a U of 1, that's an R of 1. 1 plus a half is 1.5. Take the reciprocal is 0.66. So tell me if I get it wrong, but I think if I put that with that, I get a combined U of 0.66, and I started with a U of 2. So this is worth 2 walls actually. So putting that on there is like having a wall 3 times the thickness. And in another part of the house, because of space limitations, I had a room which was really cold on a wall, and I put on just 12 millimeters of this stuff, and now the room feels really, you know, quite nicely toasty. So yes, it is worth the effort. It may not be per the book, but it is worth the effort, believe me. And these sheets, obviously they're bigger. They're 4 foot by 8 foot, 2.4 by 1.2 if you like, and they're about 16 or 17 pounds. And then plasterboard is cheap, and then I'll use feather edge plasterboard, and I'll get it on the wall, skim it at the joints, but I won't skim the rest. So if you're careful, that works. I've done that several times. You don't need a plasterer in. If you're just careful how you do it, you can skim over the joints and you paint it, and it just looks like a normal wall. Well, I thought about this overnight, and I decided actually all the plaster has to come off. Now we can see this wall properly. We can see these are 3-inch bricks. Now the main part of the house is in 2.5-inch bricks. So this is later, I think, than the main part of the house. And in any case, I know that wall to my right there is a double brick wall. So at one time that was an external wall. So just reading a bit online, I think by 1803 all bricks were generally 3-inch bricks. And also looking at this mortar, I think it's lime mortar. It's very difficult to tell, but I think it's perhaps lime mortar. Now I believe that cement mortar came in from about 1850 onwards. So I'm just going to make a wild guess and say this wall is between 1800 and 1850. Whereas the main part of the house is perhaps a little bit older. You can see here there's a lead pipe there that used to be for the toilet, and somewhere down here to the right we can see that I think the hole has been blocked up where the waste pipe used to go outside, and if you go to the outside of this wall, you can actually see still a lead waste pipe, but it's been cut off and kind of hammered over. Well, now it's time to sort out this brickwork. Bit of daylight there. I don't want to be pushing that brick too much, otherwise it could end up down in the passageway between the two houses. Looks a bit frightening, but it's actually fine. Now further down, sorry, this is handheld, you can see a hole there, and that's the original house wall. Now that mortar has not worn very much, and that bit of wall might not have been seen for 150 years. I'll patch this up. Then this has been put in to replace the original wall plate where it's probably rotten. You can see the end of the plate there. Just wood. It's called wall plate, but it's just a piece of wood that runs along the top of the wall. So this is all in good shape. It's treated wood, I can tell by the colour. So all we need to do is mortar in and a roundabout. Just secure this. More daylight there. I've put a piece of wood under here to pack this. This is a new beam they've put in, and I know in the loft they've fastened this to this. But still there was a gap there, so I just packed it out. I'll start to fill this in now. That's all repaired now. Well, I'm still battling on with this, and I've fitted new socket boxes 35mm deep, and also the galvanised strip that covers the cable. But every time I work on these bricks, if I'm using the impact drill, it vibrates a lot of the mortar out. I am going to have to go around and patch it up a bit, I think. It's not about to fall down, honestly, but it is a bit flaky in places. You can see that I've offered up the first piece of insulation board. Now I've had to go across this wall, chopping off the high spots, but it is surprisingly vertical on average. Yeah, you can see how I've cut out the foam to take this socket box here, and I'm probably going to have to do a bit of trimming at the back here. I've cut out a channel for the cable just using a Stanley knife and then a wood chisel. Now that I'm happy with this, I'll cut the rest of the insulation and the plasterboard. Now altogether, the plasterboard and the insulation has cost me about £120. If you want that in euros or US dollars, add about 15% to that number. Now I did look at getting the bonded plasterboard and insulation, where the two are bonded together, and in many ways it's much easier to use. It's about 70% more expensive, less than double. But I didn't go for it for a couple of reasons. One was, this wall is so uneven, I wanted to abut the plasterboards over a piece of this insulation. I didn't want it to be butting right at the edge because it could have been uneven. When I skim it, it may not have looked flush. So that was one reason. The other reason is, of course, that this insulation doesn't go to the floor, and then I'd have had to have been cutting away insulation to get the compound plasterboard to fit. So those were the reasons there. When I come to fix this to the wall, I'll just use screws and roll plugs, but I'm going to have to be quite careful to put the plugs in the middle of a brick, which adds a lot of complication. If it was just plain plaster, I could just pretty much plug anywhere, but these bricks are so soft, and the mortar is like ridiculously soft, so if I landed up on the edge of a brick, it would just break the brick, the plug, you know, expanding with the screw in it, and in the mortar it just wouldn't hold at all. So I'm actually going to have to, you know, do it in rows across here, and I think probably I'm going to have to measure out from this side somewhere and try and land in the middle of a brick. Well, you know, that makes it pretty tedious. You wouldn't have to do that, of course, like I said, if it was a normal plastered wall. I've got all the insulation cut, I've got all the plasterboard cut to its basic size. It's all in this room. Bit of a job getting it upstairs with my son. Just cutting out here for the socket box. So what I'm doing on this piece is a kind of first fit to make sure it's all going to go together okay. But I've still got quite a bit to do before this can be screwed on. Here where we've got the insulation, this board is quite well supported and I'm happy with that. But we've got this section here where there's nothing behind this plasterboard. Now from about here onwards the skirting board will go on. I am a bit worried that, you know, over tightening or something kicked could break the plasterboard off by here. So I have to think about that. What I might have to do is mix up some plaster and just plaster behind this. So here we go with the 4mm drill. All I'm doing is marking this insulation really. You can't do it against the wall directly. You just, you know, with a wall like this, you put a 4mm drill into this, you'll never find where the hole was. So you just like that, where we were here, here, down here. So now we can see clearly where the holes are in this insulation. And I only need to drill it as deep as a plug. Let's have a look. That, oh actually, which is about to there. Just taking it steady. There we are. Got to be careful, it's obviously going to try and drop. This doesn't support the drill. Welcome to a very wet Sunday afternoon. I've just got the second panel on. There's only 6 screws in each panel, but it'll have skirting board at the bottom, and also I'll probably put some insulation against the sloping part of the roof above with plasterboard. So actually it's held top and bottom. It's really the screws are just to kind of hold it in the middle, and I've managed to hit every screw so far. It's a bit tricky trying to work at that depth, and you've got to fiddle about with the screw, you know, it's a bit like probing to find where the plug is. But I've got them all so far, and actually the joints lining up really well. Let me try and move this camera a bit to show you. See that joint between the two, you can see the socket box there. And it's all working out okay at the moment. I'm having to point the wall as I go along. I think I said earlier I wasn't going to bother pointing the wall, but honestly, in some places I could pull the bricks out. So I've dug out the worst of it. There's no point just pointing on the surface because that's not doing anything. You've got to dig it out at least an inch. So the next job will be this section of wall here, and I've reached the point I'm probably going to have to put the protection on for the cables that go to that socket there. You can see it's on the floor at the moment. And I've looped those cables through that back box, just using some connector blocks to complete the ring for now, and I need to put the shielding over it. You know, if you ever inside your socket see an earth cable like that, where they've put a bit of sleeve over the earth, and then you notice there's actually 2 earths going into it, and then guess what? What you find is somebody's twisted them together inside like that. Pretty shocking. I don't know if that's focused, sorry. You know? I've put that socket front on there, and you see the 3 telltale lights on that test plug, which says I've wired it the right way around. It's a bit tricky using plugs and screws, but I just don't want this thing to move. I'll probably mortar over that actually, just to make sure that for certain that's in place. You know, that really is vertical. Yeah, spot on that. Cutting out for this socket box, I've done it completely by measurement from the edge. So to start with, I've just made a small cut to see if I'm kind of in the right place, which I am. I've pulled it out from the wall so I don't electrocute myself. You just start with a hole in the 4 corners, you see, and then you just work out from those corners. It needs a little bit more off at the top here. Just score it with a knife. And once you're through the paper, my knife's a bit blunt, the plaster will just come away, look. I mortared up this last panel of wall here last evening, it was actually quite bad. I had to rake a lot out, quite a few kind of unsettled bricks, and then left that overnight. Today, this part of the wall here is quite bowed in, and I was getting no support at all in the middle, so I've basically cement rendered it, put the excess on, scraped it off. It's not perfect, of course, but it's a lot better than it was. It's near enough. So I've already drilled the holes. Oh, there's one. There must be one in the middle somewhere. I don't know where it's gone now. And I can put the panel on now. Well, so far I'm hitting all my plugs. So there's just a couple of places where I need an extra screw. So there's here. There's virtually nothing in it, but I want it to blend exactly right. So I'll just take my chances and drill in here and get a big headed screw, and hopefully it'll just pull that in slightly there. And then the other place is here. Now, so it could do with a screw kind of there. This is why you need to measure. I drilled 5 holes before I hit something solid. Now that I've finished putting these boards on, I've moved on to insulate this angled part of the ceiling. So you can see the insulation there, and the board is screwed on. Now, fairly typical of this house, things turn out to be more difficult than you expect. I'd marked off already where the joists are in the ceiling, and I've put 4 screws into those. It should have been a 2-minute job to put those screws in, but the joists are so hard. I don't know what they're made of. Once I'd screwed in maybe 20 millimeters, the screws were seizing up, and even with the drill I couldn't turn them. So I had to drill pilot holes and all sorts. Now that I've got all the boarding done, I'm going to turn my attention to skim plastering these feathered edges and also these gaps up here. So I've got some of this self-adhesive binding tape, I'm going to call it. Try and get it in the right place. It's kind of, you pull the back off and put it down the joint. Oh, there's actually a line marked in the middle. It's quite a while since I've done any of this, so I'm just reminding myself how to do it. So it seems to be better to pull down a strip like that, then use the black lines on this bonding tape here to line up with the gap you're trying to cover. Now this is only going to work if your 2 boards are level. If one's much further out than the other, you probably end up, once you've plastered it, with this tape showing. So it's worth the effort to get the boards, you know, lined up. You've got to make sure the tape's really firmly pressed on before you take this paper off, because the glue on it sticks to your fingers like crazy. Also, in preparation for filling the joints, I've got some of this corner mesh here, cut it down the centre to give me 2 flat pieces like that, and I've pushed some of those into the joints, and I'm expecting that it'll help the plaster to just bond together so that it doesn't crack and a section drop out. You can see what I mean up here where I've pushed it in, and I've put a few pins in, only into the plasterboard above, and not tight, but when it's all plastered it'll just help hold it all together. If you're building up thick layers, this is about the consistency that you need. It's like thick cream. You can put plenty on and it's not going to drop all over your feet. I'm picking up speed a bit now as I remember how to do this. Well, this patching plaster is remaining workable a lot longer than the last lot that I had. So I can make it thicker and more of it, but I'm beginning to wonder now where I've bought enough. I bought 7.5 kilos We've finished all the heavy work. All that's left now is basic decorating. I've got a socket cover to put on down there. I've got some metal sheathing to put on the cable back there. I just didn't quite have enough at the time. The skirting board will go on after the cupboard goes back in over here. I couldn't get a perfect finish. I'll just finish these off probably with a quick skim of filler, but that's just the basic decorating. It's been a lot of work, but it will make a huge difference to this room. I hope that was useful to somebody. Thanks for watching.